whilst my show was on air, about 3:30 yesterday, we got news that Mr. Anderson had in fact been suspended from the Tory party. But get this, because it's really important. He was suspended not for uttering Islamophobic comments. He was suspended for not apologising. Not the same thing. Since then, both the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister of this country have spectacularly failed to characterise those awful words as crossing the line between calling out Islamism, which none of us want, but what Anderson did was cross the line into anti-Muslim comments. As the day wore on, it just got more bizarre. In a statement last night, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, said, this is remarkable, right? He did not utter a word about the fact that Lee Anderson, one of his most high-profile MPs, had just been suspended. The statement from the PM mentions, quote, protests hijacked by extremists, quote, anti-Semitic tropes beamed onto Parliament, quote, democracy, quote, prejudice and anti-Semitism since 7/10. He also goes on to talk about how he's proud to be Britain's first British Asian Prime Minister. All stuff that he has said before. Absolutely no reference whatsoever to Lee Anderson being suspended. Nor does the Prime Minister ever mention the word Islamophobia or the phrase anti-Muslim hatred. Nowhere. Not in reference to anything. He talks about prejudice and anti-Semitism. It's absolutely bizarre. It's like Lee Anderson and the comments that he made that were widely considered to be Islamophobic and for which he refused to apologise, which then in turn led to his suspension, were never ever uttered. But we know that they were. Let me play them to you again, in fact. Can we have Lee Anderson once more?
Now, I don't actually believe that these Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Khan and they've got control of London. And again, this stems with Khan. He's actually given our capital city away to his mates.
I mean, he hasn't. And those words, I doubt very much, would ever have been uttered had Khan not himself been Muslim. We are clearly not in the grip of Islamists in this country. And if any of you were listening to yesterday's show, I think that became very apparent through a couple of calls. Let me be really, really crystal clear about this. There is no place for anti-Semitism within politics and society. And there is certainly no place for anti-Muslim hatred in politics and society. But the starting point to fight these things, and in fact all forms of prejudice and discrimination and racism, is to clearly identify them with the appropriate words. So, if there is an incident in which words are used that are broadly seen as anti-Muslim or Islamophobic, just describe them that way so we can start to deal with the problem. Now, the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, was out and about this morning in what can only be described as a series of bonkers interviews. He kept saying words matter, but refused to admit that Lee Anderson, claiming that the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has extremist mates who are controlling Khan and London, was in fact Islamophobic. This was Dowden.
Well, I think the chance that it could be taken, the fact that it could be taken in that way is the reason why those comments led to the Chief Whip asking for an apology from the Prime Minister. I share those concerns about how they could be taken in that way, and that's why it was right he should be asked for an apology, and when he failed to give that apology, the whip was removed.
The words can be taken that way. Just for the record, Alex, can we play Lee Anderson just once more?
Now, I don't actually believe that these Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Khan and they've got control of London. And again, this stems with Khan. He's actually given our capital city away to his mates.
Those words were defamatory. They were Islamophobic and they were dangerous. I don't think there's another way of describing it.
Overall, we shouldn't have these type of comments from any member of parliament. We certainly should not have it from a ruling government. I know other MPs have made comments which are not acceptable. I hope after this situation, I hope other MPs will now realise that making these types of comments will not go unnoticed, and the Prime Minister will be taking note and there will be action taken. And I think that is very important that other key members of Sir Sajid Javid said he wasn't happy with them. Nuskani said she wasn't happy with them. We've had so many peers and other MPs coming out in support that these comments should not be made. No MP has came out in support of Lee Anderson's comments.
Why is it that Oliver Dowden and the Prime Minister will use the word anti-Semitic, but they won't use the word Islamophobic or the phrase anti-Muslim hatred?
Well, maybe we'll need to have a meeting with the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister to get their understanding behind this.
Will you be doing that? Because I can tell you now, I imagine that if I will find out, because the best thing about LBC is you get pretty instant reaction from people who are listening. I can imagine some British Muslims feeling really let down today by the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, who refuse to use the correct language when describing this form of discrimination and prejudice.
People will always be disappointed when there's any form of prejudice against them. But the key thing was the Prime Minister.
But the key thing is, in an election year, it's pretty important, isn't it?
It's very important. And this is what. And you've got to remember, Lee Anderson's comments were made on an individual basis. These comments were not made with the support of the party or with the support of the Prime Minister or of the Deputy Prime Minister. Lee Anderson's went out on his own to make these comments. And I think so
you're saying it's a one-off?
I can't say what he'll say tomorrow or the day after.
Writing in a national newspaper, claimed that the UK was under the control of Islamists.
Well, we all know that's not the case. We all know that's not the case.
So is that a two-off?
Well, look, these are individual people. They're not speaking on behalf of the party. None of these people are in the cabinet. None of these people are speaking on behalf of the Prime Minister. They're not speaking on behalf of the party. They're speaking on behalf of themselves as individuals. And when it is a year of general election, and when the polls come and the people need to vote for them in their constituencies, it will be clear and evident that, the comments they've made and how they've, what the results will be.
Naveed, let me put this to you. This is a tweet from Baroness Farsi. She writes, disturbingly, mealy-mouthed, evasive responses by Oliver Dowden this morning, a clear display that anti-Muslim racism is tolerated within the Conservatives, that Muslims are not just fair game but convenient electoral campaign fodder. We can't even call out the obvious when it's so blatant and can't find the words to condemn. We have lost all authority on being anti-racist. No ifs, no buts, no caveats. We rightly don't allow Labour to acquiesce in anti-Semitism. Why do we think we can on Islamophobia? We must end this hierarchy of racism and stop the hypocrisy. Is the Conservative Party meddling with creating hierarchies of racism, Naveed?
Absolutely not. These are comments by individual MPs. These are not comments from the Prime Minister or anybody from the Cabinet. They do not stem from the Conservative Party's headquarters. These are individual comments, and we must be ensure that that's the case. The party.
You are joking, aren't you? I mean, there are people that are going to be listening to this thinking, Naveed, you clearly are not watching and following the same news as the rest of us.
I absolutely am.
There has been an unbelievable amount of rhetoric coming out of this current iteration of the Conservative Party, the likes of which we have never seen before. And whether it's implied anti-Muslim rhetoric or whether it's explicit anti-Muslim rhetoric, it has been weaponised by this current iteration of the Conservative Party in order to, I don't know what.
individual
It's
MPs,
not,
not
it's
by the party
systemic.
itself.
You know it and
No,
I know it.
no, it's by individuals within the party. It is not. I engage with the party at the highest level, up and down the country. The Prime Minister engages, the Cabinet engages. You've got the party chairs that engages. Up in Scotland, we've got Douglas Ross, the party chairs, Craig Hoy, Pam Gosal, doing amazing jobs supporting the Muslim and BAME communities. Individuals, you will always have individuals. It's such a large party
Naveed,
with
if it's
so many
not a
MPs.
systemic problem within the Conservative Party, why
Every
is it? I
party
will
has
ask you
issues.
again because it's such a simple question. If you are right and anti-Muslim rhetoric
Individuals within the party.
is not a systemic problem within the Tory party, why is it that when there is a blatant statement to that effect, to an Islamophobic effect, why is it that Oliver Dowden and Rishi Sunak cannot say clearly what it is? Why is it that they have gone out of their way to be deliberately evasive and refuse to use the word Islamophobic or
Again,
use the phrase anti-Muslim
as the Deputy Chair of the
hatred?
Conservative
Why?
Muslim Forum, I can tell you that we are engaging with the party on a regular basis, and absolutely anybody who comes out with comments which are not acceptable to the community and the population at large will be called out. We have called out Lee Anderson on his comments.
That's
and we're
not
very
what I'm
happy with the
asking you about.
exception.
I'm asking
Yeah,
you about the
but
absence of
but you're
something.
consistent.
And the absence of the something is this. There has been a blatant set of words that have been strung together in a really unpleasant phrase uttered by Lee Anderson. The first thing you did in this interview was to call it yourself Islamophobic and anti-Muslim. Why is it that the Prime Minister of this country and the Deputy Prime Minister have made absolute fools of themselves by refusing to use the right language? Because I think you and I can agree words matter. But if you do not identify the problem, you cannot deal with the problem, Naveed.
Well, absolutely. Look, this is something
Hang on,
that
you just
they will
said
have to-
absolutely.
No,
so
no,
tell me why it is you will not.
They will have to deal with this. They will have to look at this and say, as I said, we will have a meeting with them and find out exactly what their thought process on this and why they're finding it difficult to use specific words to the terms. But the key thing here is, Lee Anderson has made these comments. He was suspended from the party, and I'm sure that this sends a fantastic signal out to other people, other MPs within the party, and other post holders within the party.
Should Suella Braverman be suspended? Let's take your version of events as being accurate. So, if you're saying these are just a bunch of individuals, why isn't Suella Braverman being suspended?
I'm sure the Prime Minister or the Chief Whip.
Why hasn't she been suspended? Have you urged them to suspend her?
We as I said, this
is a woman who has a
has
huge
broke over the last
platform.
couple of days. We are dealing with the government. We will hopefully be speaking with the government at the beginning of the week to find out exactly what's going on with anybody that is making these comments. Suella Braverman has made some comments. Robert Jinnick's made some comments, and hopefully the Prime Minister and the Chief Whip will be speaking to these people. Regardless of, the Prime Minister, I'm sure, is on top of this because he's shown that he's in control by suspending Lee Anderson. But taken away from that, the party's 200 years old, constantly evolving, and to say that the comments that they made, that the country is under Islamist rule or London is under Islamist rule, absolutely, these comments do not make sense whatsoever. The security services are in full control of the capital and of the country. So, I'm not sure why these MPs decide to make these comments. There's no truth in these comments, and I'm hoping that going forward, we will not be seeing any further comments of this nature in the run-up to the election.